This might be the greatest underdog story in the history of the world. And it is one that powerful people spent 200 years trying to make sure you would never hear. 500,000 human beings, born in chains, trapped in the richest and most brutal slave colony on earth, did something no enslaved people had ever done before, and none have done since. They did not just revolt. They took on the most powerful armies in the world, and they won. They shattered the Spanish. They bled the British white. And then they faced Napoleon himself, the man who had conquered Europe, and they sent his grand army home in coffins, 50,000 of them, dead in the mud and the fever. When the smoke finally cleared, these men and women who had been bought and sold as property had done the impossible. They had beaten an empire and built the first free black nation on the face of the earth. This is the true story of the Haitian Revolution, drawn from the accounts of the people who lived it, and the historians who pieced it back together. It is one of the most astonishing military upsets ever recorded. It is also one of the most deliberately buried. And by the end, you are going to understand exactly why. Viewer discretion is advised. To understand how 500,000 enslaved people brought down an empire, you first have to understand the machine they were trapped inside. Because this place was not simply a colony with slavery in it. It was slavery, refined into an engine of profit more total and more lethal than almost anywhere else on earth. The French called it Saint-Domingue. We will call it by the name its people would one day give it in freedom, the name it still carries today. We will call it Haiti. It occupied the western third of an island the Spanish had named Hispaniola. This was the island where, 3 centuries earlier, Columbus first landed, and where the native Taino people had been worked and swept away by disease within a few generations. In their place, the French planted sugar, and in the 18th century, sugar was money the way oil would later be money. The scale of it is hard to hold in the mind. By the 1780s, this one colony, smaller than the state of Maryland, produced roughly 40% of all the sugar and more than half of all the coffee consumed in the entire Western world. Picture it. Endless fields of green cane running to the foot of the mountains. The boiling houses where the cut cane was crushed and its juice cooked down in great copper cauldrons. The air thick with smoke and heat around the clock. Harbors so crowded with ships they looked like a floating forest of masts. The wealth flowed back across the ocean and built the golden port cities of France. The comfort of Europe rested, quietly, on this one small island. And all of it was manufactured by close to 500,000 enslaved Africans. That was a larger population than the entire 13 American states at the time of their own revolution. And they were held down by a white population of only about 30,000. The enslaved outnumbered their enslavers roughly 10 to 1. Between those two worlds stood a third group, the free people of color, about 30,000 as well. Many were of mixed race. Some were wealthy planters in their own right, and a number of them owned enslaved people themselves. And yet, no matter their money, the law kept them beneath every white person on the island. In Haiti, race was a cage with 3 floors, and every soul knew exactly which floor they stood on. Here is the fact that tells you everything about how this machine worked. The enslaved population of Haiti did not grow, it shrank. The labor was so relentless, the punishments so savage, the disease and hunger so constant, that the enslaved died faster than they were born. The average person, once landed in the colony, could expect to live perhaps 7 to 10 years. And so, rather than keep the people they held alive, the planters simply bought more. Tens of thousands of fresh captives a year, poured off the slave ships to replace the ones the colony had already consumed. It was cheaper, the arithmetic ran, to work a human being to death and buy another than to let one live. The cruelty was not a flaw in the system, it was the system. Brandings, mutilations, private prisons on the plantations. Punishments designed to be so horrifying that the 10 would never dare rise against the 1. It was, everyone agreed, unthinkable that they ever would. And that was the whole bet. The entire glittering fortune rested on a single assumption, shared by every planter and official and investor who profited from it, that the enslaved could be terrorized into permanence, that this would last forever, because it always had. They were about to learn how wrong an entire world could be. The first crack came from an idea, and from the men who spoke that idea aloud without ever meaning it to cross the ocean. In 1789, France erupted in revolution and proclaimed to the world 3 words that would prove impossible to contain: liberty, equality, fraternity. But the men who wrote them did not mean them for the colonies. The wealth of Haiti was the wealth of France, and France had no intention of freeing the people who produced it. The free men of color moved first. In 1790, one of them, Vincent Auger, came home from Paris and demanded the rights the revolution had just proclaimed. He was not asking to end slavery, only to be treated as an equal. He was refused. He took up arms. He was crushed, captured, and executed in the most deliberate way the authorities could devise. They broke him on the wheel, shattering his body joint by joint in the public square, as a warning. The warning did not work. It never does. It only tells everyone watching how frightened the powerful really are. Because the people watching most closely were not the free men of color. They were the 500,000 in the fields. In August of 1791, enslaved men from the great plantations of the northern plain began meeting in secret. Many of them held the highest positions the system allowed, the drivers and foremen and coachmen who could move between estates and carry word. On the 14th of August, they gathered on one plantation and laid their plan, a coordinated rising, every estate at once. And about a week later, on the night of the 21st, tradition holds they gathered again at a wooded place called Bois Caïman for a ceremony. Of that ceremony, no eyewitness account survives. The vivid scene many Haitians picture today, the priest and the priestess, the storm overhead, the blood oath sworn in the firelight, comes down to us through sacred memory and through a romanticized account set down 30 years later. What is certain is that whatever was decided on those August nights, the enslaved of the North had crossed a line there was no coming back from. Within days, the northern plain was on fire. It began on the night of the 22nd of August, 1791, and it did not stop. The enslaved rose across the great sugar districts of the North, and they burned it all. The cane fields, the mills, the great houses, the entire glittering apparatus of their own suffering, set alight against the sky. Witnesses described a wall of smoke so vast it blotted out the sun, and ash falling like black snow across the ruined plain, the horizon glowing orange through the haze, night after night after night. The thing that could never happen was happening. Listen to how it came to one man, the manager of the Clément plantation, one of the first overrun, who lived to write it down. His dog began barking in the dark. He quieted it and went back to sleep. Minutes later, he woke to find his house surrounded. "I jumped out of my bed," he wrote, and shouted, "Who goes there?" A voice like thunder answered me, "It is death." His life was spared only because the man leading the crowd at his door, Popkin, had once been enslaved on that very plantation and knew his face. Popkin was killed within weeks, and the authorities carried his head into the city of Cap Français and set it on a pike, once again, as a warning. And once again, it failed. The uprising did not die with its first leader. It spread, it organized, it endured. Out of its ranks over the next few years would rise the one man who could turn a slave rebellion into an army that made the empires of Europe afraid. But nothing about this revolution ran in a straight line, because the man who became its genius began by fighting for the wrong side. His name was Toussaint. History would come to know him as Toussaint Louverture, and he was one of the most extraordinary figures of his century. But he did not begin as anyone's idea of a liberator. He had been born enslaved around 1743, the son of an African captive whose own father, it was said, had been a military commander in the West African kingdom of Dahomey. Unlike almost everyone around him, Toussaint was freed years before the revolution began. He became literate, well-read, a devout Catholic. He worked as a coachman and a steward. And here is the detail the legend of Toussaint has always struggled to hold. In his years as a free man, he rented land, and for a time he owned enslaved people of his own. The man who would become the deadliest enemy of slavery in the Western Hemisphere had once been part of the system he would destroy. When the rising came, he did not rush in. He watched and waited, and then joined. And his gift showed itself at once. He took ragged bands of the formerly enslaved and forged them into disciplined soldiers. He recruited white officers to write his letters and drill his men. He was a strategist who kept his own counsel and saw 3 moves ahead of every rival on the field. And then the revolution did the first of the things that make it so hard to tell simply. Because when the enslaved of Haiti first took up organized arms, they did it not for revolutionary France, but for the King of Spain. Spain held the eastern half of the island and was at war with France. And Spain offered the black insurgents weapons and supplies and legitimacy if they would fight the French. So they did. For a time, the future founder of the first free black nation fought under the Spanish crown, against the very republic that would soon claim to be the liberator of mankind. What broke the deadlock was the one thing no European government had ever been willing to do. And it happened not by design, but out of pure desperation, in the smoke of a burning city. In the summer of 1793, the French Republic's own commissioner in the colony, a man named Saint-Domingue, found himself besieged, his authority collapsing, Cap Français in flames around him. He needed soldiers, and there was only one place left on earth to get them. On the 29th of August, 1793, standing in the ashes of the burning port, Saint-Domingue abolished slavery in the north of Haiti. It was a battlefield improvisation before it was a principle, but it could not be taken back. That February, in Paris, the National Convention ratified it and went further, abolishing slavery in every French colony and making all men living in them, of every color, full citizens of France. For the first time in the history of the world, a great European empire had abolished the institution its wealth was built upon. Toussaint understood at once what it meant. He switched sides. In the spring of 1794, he abandoned Spain and brought his army over to France. And now he fought for the side that had abolished slavery, and he fought brilliantly. He drove out the Spanish, and he faced down the British who had invaded to seize this fabulous colony and restore its slavery for their own profit. The British poured tens of thousands of soldiers into the island, and the island devoured them, above all through yellow fever, the invisible killer that scythed through European troops with a horror that would define this entire war. Having buried tens of thousands of men and won nothing but graves, the British gave up and withdrew. By the close of the century, Toussaint Louverture was the master of Haiti. In name, he governed for France. In truth, he ruled. He had defeated two European empires and risen from an enslaved coachman to one of the most talked-about men in the Atlantic world. And here the contradictions gather. Because his rule was not a simple story of liberation. To rebuild a shattered economy and give his fragile country the strength to defend itself, Toussaint did something that troubles his memory to this day. He forced the formerly enslaved back onto the plantations. Not as slaves. They were legally free. They were to be paid, and the whip was banned. But the labor was compulsory, and it bound them to the land. To people who had just burned those same plantations to win their freedom, being ordered back into the cane fields, even for wages, even by a black general, felt like a betrayal of everything they had bled for. And when they resisted, he crushed them. In 1801, he put down a revolt led by his own nephew, a general named Moise, and had him shot. Then Toussaint did the thing that sealed his fate. In 1801, he had a constitution drawn up that made him governor of the colony for life, with the power to name his own successor, and he dared to do it without asking Paris. A former slave writing the laws of France's richest colony as though it were already his own country. That document landed on the desk of a man who would decide that Toussaint Louverture had to be destroyed. That man was Napoleon Bonaparte, and what he set in motion would become the bloodiest chapter of the whole war. Napoleon had no intention of letting a nation of free black citizens govern the richest colony on earth. He assembled the largest overseas expedition France had ever launched. More than 20,000 veteran troops packed aboard a great fleet, its sails filling the horizon, bound across the Atlantic under his own brother-in-law, General Leclerc. Leclerc's secret orders have survived, and they unfolded in three cold phases. First, reassure Toussaint and promise him anything, in the order's own words, to get ourselves into the country. Then, once dug in, turn on him, strip his power, and use the Black Army itself to crush any who resisted. And finally, arrest Toussaint and every black general, deport the entire officer corps, and disarm the black population completely. Any caught with a weapon in hand were to be shot like rebels. The orders did not spell out the return of slavery. They did not have to. A disarmed and leaderless people under a white military government would have no way left to stop it. At first, the sheer weight of the invasion drove the defenders back, but not everywhere. At a mountain fort called Crête-à-Pierrot, Dessalines and his men held out against overwhelming numbers, bombarded from every side. Cut off from water in the crushing heat, The black soldiers chewed on lead bullets to fight their thirst, and held. Through the nights, the French outside the walls were unnerved to hear the defenders singing the anthems of the French Revolution back at them, until some of those French soldiers began to wonder aloud whether they were the ones fighting on the wrong side. And then, worn down and hopelessly outnumbered, Toussaint agreed to talk. He was promised his freedom and the safety of his officers. Believing he had his terms, he laid down his arms and went home to his plantation. It was a trap. On the 7th of June, 1802, one of Leclerc's generals lured him to a meeting on the pretext of discussing where to station some troops. French soldiers surrounded him. He was seized, put aboard a ship, and carried across the ocean to France, his family arrested and deported with him. They locked him in a stone fortress high in the freezing Jura Mountains, a place chosen for one quality above all others: it's cold. There the man born under the tropical sun of the Caribbean was left in a frigid, dripping cell through the depth of a mountain winter, his rations cut, his health failing, alone, with the snow piling against the walls. He did not last the winter. On the 7th of April, 1803, Toussaint Louverture died in that cell, thousands of miles from the country he had freed, and he never saw its independence. The words that have come down to us, spoken as he was led aboard the ship that carried him to his death, are these. In overthrowing him, he said, they had cut down only the trunk of the tree of the blacks' liberty, but it would grow back from the roots, because the roots were deep and they were many. He was right, and what happened next is the reason. Because while France congratulated itself on removing Toussaint, the truth of its intentions came out, and it came out in blood. On the neighboring island of Guadeloupe, the French openly restored slavery, crushing the resistance there in a campaign of terror. And in May of 1802, Napoleon signed the law that made it plain for all to see. Slavery was to be maintained, and black and mixed-race people were barred from setting foot on French soil. When the people of Haiti understood, beyond any doubt, that France had come not to rule them but to drag them back into chains, something changed that could never be changed back. The war stopped being about politics. It became a war for survival, and both sides fought it that way. Yellow fever was already eating Leclerc's army alive. Within months, he had lost more than half his men to it, and in November of 1802, the fever took Leclerc himself. His replacement, General Rochambeau, answered the collapse with a campaign of extermination. He drowned the black soldiers of the Cap Français garrison in the harbor by the hundreds, sending them to the bottom in weighted ships. He imported dogs trained to kill and set them on his prisoners. He wrote near the end that only a true genocide could hold the colony now, that they must destroy every black person in the mountains, men and women both, sparing only the children under 12. France, having failed to re-enslave Haiti, had resolved to depopulate it. It did the opposite of what he intended. The savagery welded the population together as nothing else could have. The formerly enslaved and the free people of color, rivals and often enemies for a decade, finally understood that the French meant chains or death for every one of them, and they united. And leadership of that united front fell to the man who would finish what Toussaint had begun. His name was Jean-Jacques Dessalines. He had been born enslaved, and unlike Toussaint, he carried the proof of it on his own body, a back mapped with the scars of the whip, and a hatred of slavery with nothing abstract in it. He had been one of Toussaint's most brilliant and most ruthless commanders, and where Toussaint had spent his life seeking some peace with the whites, Dessalines had no such hope and wanted none. He gave the revolution a single absolute purpose: not autonomy, not a better deal inside the French Empire, total, permanent independence and nothing less. The insurgents took a new name, the Indigenous Army, the army of the land's own people, and they took a new flag. They ripped the white band out of the center of the French tricolor and threw it away, and kept only the blue and the red, standing side by side. Black and mixed race, united. The white, gone. Through 1803, as war reignited between France and Britain, and a British blockade choked off Rochambeau's reinforcements, the United Army drove the French back, town by town, toward the sea. And on the 18th of November 1803, at the Battle of Vertières, outside Cap Français, Dessalines broke them for the last time. What remained of Napoleon's grand expedition surrendered, giving themselves up not to the Haitians but to the British ships offshore, to escape falling into the hands of the people they had come to enslave. The invasion had cost some 50,000 French soldiers and sailors their lives. The most powerful military on earth had sent its finest veterans to reconquer a colony of the formerly enslaved, and been beaten into the ground. In exile years later, Napoleon would call it one of the greatest mistakes of his life. On the first day of January 1804, in the town of Gonaïves, before the ranks of his army, Jean-Jacques Dessalines declared the birth of a free and sovereign nation, and he refused to keep the colonial name. He turned his back on Saint-Domingue, on French sugar and 3 centuries of bondage, and reached instead for the name the island's first people had given it, long before Columbus ever came. He named the country Haiti, the name this story has carried from its very first words. It was the first nation in history born of a successful slave revolt, the first free black republic on earth, only the second independent nation in the entire Western Hemisphere, after the United States itself. 500,000 people who had been bought and sold as property had risen up, beaten the armies of Spain and Britain and Napoleonic France, and made themselves, by force of arms, free. By any measure, it is one of the most remarkable things that has ever happened. And the birth of it was brutal, in a way the story does not get to skip. In the first months of 1804, Dessalines ordered the killing of the remaining white population of Haiti. Moving from town to town through February and March, he oversaw the massacre of the white men. The women and children were spared at first, and then he decided they too must die. And by the end of April, the white population had been all but wiped from the island. A handful of doctors, a few Polish soldiers who had deserted the French, a small colony of German farmers were spared. Almost no one else was. Some of his own soldiers refused the order to kill women and children, and he compelled the free men of color to take part so that none of them could later stand apart and claim clean hands. It was a massacre of thousands. Dessalines did not hide it. He proclaimed it. "We have given these true cannibals war for war, crimes for crimes, outrages for outrages," he announced. "Yes, I have saved my country. I have avenged America." He had just watched France try, in deadly earnest, to exterminate his people, and he meant to leave the old masters no foothold from which to ever return. And that is the last time in this story that Haiti holds the initiative, because from here the rest of the world takes over. And what the world did to Haiti is the reason you were never taught this in school. Here is what you would expect to happen next. A colonized people rises up, defeats an empire, and declares its freedom. And in time the world, however grudgingly, comes to recognize it. That is exactly how it went for Haiti's neighbor to the north. When the United States won its independence, it eventually took its place among the nations of the earth. Watch what happened to the nation that had done something far harder. The world did not celebrate Haiti. The world was terrified of it. Because Haiti was not just a new country on a map, it was proof. Living, breathing proof that the enslaved could rise and fight and win. And every slaveholding power on earth understood instantly exactly what that proof might light in the millions of people they still held in bondage. Haiti could not be allowed to stand as an inspiration. It had to be made into a warning. The United States, itself a slave nation, refused to admit that Haiti even existed. Under pressure from the southern slave states, Washington would not recognize the second oldest republic in the Americas for nearly 60 years. Not until 1862, in the middle of its own civil war, once the slaveholding South had walked out of its government. For most of a human lifetime, the most powerful nation in the hemisphere simply pretended Haiti was not there. And France was not content to pretend. France wanted to be paid. In 1825, more than 20 years after its humiliating defeat, France came back. Not with an army this time. With a line of warships anchored off the coast, their guns run out and trained on the shore, and a document drawn up in Paris without a single Haitian in the room. France would recognize Haiti's independence and give up its claim to reconquer the island on one condition. Haiti would pay France an indemnity to compensate the former colonists for what they had lost. And what France demanded to be paid for included the enslaved people themselves. The very human beings who had freed themselves, counted still as stolen property. The sum was 150 million francs, a figure so enormous the young nation could never hope to raise it. Under the guns of the French fleet, the Haitian president signed. He had no real choice. Sit with what that means for a second, because it is one of the most staggering things in this entire story. A people who had been stolen from Africa, sold, and worked toward death, and who had then freed themselves at the cost of more than 100,000 lives, were now ordered to compensate their former owners for the crime of no longer being their property. They were made to pay the people who had enslaved them at gunpoint, and to pay it, they had to borrow from French banks, which meant Haiti now owed France for the loans it took out to pay France. A double debt, the ransom and the interest on the ransom. The payments dragged on for decades. Haiti made its last payment on that debt in 1883, and France certified it settled 10 years after that. Close to a century in which the poorest nation in the hemisphere shipped its wealth across the ocean to one of the richest, just for the right to exist. 2 centuries later, when a Haitian president stood up and demanded that France give back what the ransom had taken, a sum he counted in the tens of billions, France refused, and that demand became one of the grievances that helped drive him from power. The bill, in its way, was never truly paid back. The only enslaved people who ever won their own freedom by force of arms were made to buy that freedom a second time, in cash, from the empire they had beaten, and to keep paying for it for the better part of 100 years. And then came the quietest part, and in some ways the most effective. Haiti was erased. This astonishing, world-altering revolution was simply written out of the story the West chose to tell about the age of revolutions. The American Revolution and the French Revolution were enshrined as the great births of modern freedom. But the one revolution that carried the idea of freedom the furthest, all the way to the enslaved, all the way to the people the law had called property, that one was pushed to the margins, turned into a footnote, a horror story, a strange and bloody episode in a faraway place. One Haitian scholar had a word for what was done to it. It was made unthinkable. And the reason was not complicated. To take Haiti seriously meant raising awkward questions about the French Revolution and about Napoleon, the great national hero. It meant reminding Americans that their shining republic had refused for 60 years to shake the hand of a nation of free black people. It was easier and far more comfortable to look away. So the world looked away for 200 years. Toussaint, dying in his frozen cell, had promised that they could cut down only the trunk and that the roots would send the tree up again. He was right. The tree grew back. The nation survived. But the world made sure it would grow in the poorest, hardest soil it could arrange, and then pointed at how stunted it looked, and called that proof these people had never deserved their freedom in the first place. So now you know the story. 500,000 people in chains took on Spain and Britain and Napoleon, and beat all three. They founded the first free black nation on earth, and for the crime of proving it could be done, they were ransomed, isolated, and quietly erased from the history of the very idea they had pushed the furthest. There is a line from a man of that era that stuck with me, and I will leave it with you. Toussaint, he said, liberated his countrymen. Washington enslaved a portion of his. They did the impossible, and the world spent 2 centuries making sure you would never hear about it. So the only question left is the one I would put to you. Now that you have heard it, what do you think they were so afraid of? Tell me below, and I will be reading.